welcome everybody to the first kind of Wine Wednesday of our Blue Ribbon Tasting Series. My name is Jennifer Schuder. I'm the head of marketing for the Great State Fair of Texas. And as we all know, we can't celebrate together this year at the fair. So the staff of the fair really wanted to find ways to bring elements and traditions of the fair to you guys at home through our Fair at Home program. And the Blue Ribbon Tasting Series is part of that. Each year we showcase 20 to 30 different Texas wines in the wine garden, and we wanted to find a way to be able to do that again this year. So I enlisted a few Texas wine experts to help us put together a mixed case of the, I have to say, it's in a really stellar, lineup of 12 bottles of wine that you guys can buy and enjoy. And we're going to do 4 series of tastings, and this is the first one. So joining me tonight is Heather Queen. She was part of the panel that helped me. She is the founder of Queen of Grapes. She's a wine concierge. And my favorite quote that's on your website is, she knows good grapes when she tastes them. So I think that's that's one of those things that we wanted to kind of showcase here, how amazing Texas wine is and what a great value it is and the variety of it. Shelly Wilfong is also joining us, and she was part of the group that helped us with the wine. She's the host of This is Texas Wine podcast, which she started in June. So thank you for joining us tonight. And we also have Jason Hisaw. He is a Texas wine ambassador, and he's also a portfolio manager at Republic Distribution. So he also has a vast knowledge of Texas wine. And then tonight, we also have from the Texas Department of Agriculture, Lindsay Bearwalt, I'm sorry. She is the director of marketing for the TDA and Go Texan, and we work really closely together on any normal fair year with their Go Texan Pavilion and showcasing all the amazing products that come out of that are Texas made. And then joining us tonight from the wine side is Shawn Croft. He's the distribution manager for, I always tongue tie on this one, so I'm going to apologize. I'm sure I'm not the only one that does this. Pedernales, right? That I say it right. I always want to add extra R's and N's, and sorry, so I apologize for that up front. And Rae Wilson, she's the owner and winemaker at Dandy Rose. So, and you started that in 2014, and then you're also a co-founder of the Growers Project that started in 2016. So welcome everybody. Again, I'm really happy you guys could join us. I'm looking forward to drinking some of this wine. And I wanted to start off the conversation a little bit with Lindsay, because as I said, part of the mission of the fair is supporting Texas agriculture. And the wine industry isn't something people immediately think about as Texas agriculture, but it really is deeply rooted and one of the biggest growing segments of agriculture for Texas.
That's right. It is the 5th largest wine producing state in the United States. We actually have one of the oldest we're actually one of the oldest wine growing states as well. First recorded wines were here in the 1650s. So, and as you mentioned, the fastest growing agriculture wine sector in Texas currently. And I think you mentioned this before, so I won't say how many wineries there are. I think you're gonna ask some folks how many wineries there are in Texas right now. But we have quite a few, and I'll help you answer that.
I just launched a poll, so if anybody wants to jump in and answer, try to get the right answer there. See, we have a few votes already. So Lindsay, tell us a little bit about where grapes are grown in Texas and what we can.
Sure. And so Texas has 9 agricultural viticulture areas. I provided a map too for that, if that can help. That is going to go.
Oh, you know what? I did not.
That's okay. That's okay. Most of the grapes are grown here in the Texas High Plains region in the Panhandle. They say between 65 and 85% of the grapes are grown in the Texas High Plains American Viticultural Area, or AVA. Most of us are most familiar with the Texas Hill Country AVA, of course, out here about 90 miles west of Austin in Fredericksburg, that area. That is the first largest AVA in Texas, and it's the 3rd largest AVA in the United States. The Texas High Plains is the 2nd largest AVA in Texas. So that's where most of the grapes are grown, but we do have Like I said, quite a few American viticultural areas from West Texas, which housed the first American viticultural area in Texas. Most of it is in New Mexico, but there is a part of that area in Texas as well. Gulf Coast, the Valley, a large growing region right now is popping up around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Texoma. So pretty much grapes are grown all across the state. And they produce a lot of different grapes and a lot of award-winning wines from each region as well.
Heather, let me turn it over to you guys to start us talking a little bit more in depth about the wine. But one of the things that, as we were looking at what to put in the box, you guys were really looking at, is there interesting varietals out there? And there's things that people may not, that Texas is going to be really known for, moving forward and now, that people not never tried. So can you talk a little bit about, like, don't be, you may not know the grapes, but you probably will like them type of.
Yeah. So when I when Shelly and Jason and I first started talking about this, and we were trying to decide what to do and what grapes to pick what grapes to put, or bottles to put in the box, we got down and we went through some of these different varietals, and the two that I personally was just kind of like, oh, I'm so excited about these, but I don't know how excited other people are going to be about these. And I had this conversation actually with Shelly, because we'd already decided on the Albarino, and Rae's going to talk about that in a few minutes. But the other one was the Tannat. And I remember calling her going, man, I love Tannat and I love this wine, but I don't know if people are going to understand it or like it or want to go down that road with it. And she kind of talked me in saying, yeah, I think we should do it. It's a great wine. Let's do it. So, we pick things that are grown well in Texas, that do well in Texas, and we're really lucky to be able to talk to all of the winemakers and the people who manage the properties and the vineyards to bring these wines to people, to understand that Texas wine is really good. It's good wine, and it can hold its own with other people. So, or other states, and we can look at Napa and Sonoma or whatever, and we can hold our own with them and say we make great wine here. So on that note, I really would like to talk to Rae about a little bit about her story, her two wines that she has here, which is the Albarino and the Dandy Rosé. I'm gonna let you go in the order that you think is the way you want to talk about them, and then Shelly and Jason can add in their thoughts on that.
Well, great. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure, especially with something with such an incredibly steeped tradition here in Texas. And my background was in restaurants. I was a sommelier for many years, studying wine on that side of things. I decided to start learning winemaking. And so I went to Napa, and my first harvest was in 2008. And I went there and studied and worked there for a while. And then after that went to Portugal and worked for 2 different wineries there. And then France, and then came back to Texas as well. So I had moved here in about 2005. So when I came back, I heard someone talking about Texas wine, and I did not know that was something that existed here. So I thought, well, maybe I should be exploring that. So I started exploring that. It ended up leading very unexpectedly to me producing wine here. I assumed that I would have gone back to the West Coast or to Europe. And the longer that I started, exploring what was happening here, I saw the incredible potential. This place is very large. It's larger than the entire country of France. So the potential to make an incredible range of styles and what varieties can work really well here was just very intriguing. And it's also intriguing to be on the early side of that exploration. I mean, it does have a long history here, but in any modern times, pretty much after Prohibition, it kind of ended a lot of the industry here. So it really, in recent times, it pretty much we've restarted the industry from the early 70s with plantings then. So it's, when you have an annual harvest, something that started pretty much in the early 70s, we're in its infancy for sure in our industry, but it's also really exciting because there's so much that we're exploring. I think it also puts both the consumers as well as wine producers in a very similar place, because although we're obviously coming from different sides of it. We're all kind of exploring and getting to know these regions at the same time. So we're all learning what it tastes like when it comes from this particular vineyard or that, and the family names and the, these kind of regions and what varieties are working. So I think that that's also an exciting part. I think a big part that I'm interested in doing as well is kind of helping build the culture of the wine culture here in Texas, because I think that when you look at well-established regions and the cultural traditions that you have around it, that's something that just naturally kind of evolves. And I think in a place as large as Texas, and with an industry as young as we have, I think that, helping build those is a really great way of connecting people, both to the agriculture behind it, as well as to, something that came from the ground underneath our feet, as well as to each other and enjoying it. And, I think that that's the beauty of wine. It's definitely why I'm in it. And so, yeah, I think looking at the first wine, we have so my company is called Wine for the People. And I make 3 different brands of wine under that. I have Dandy Rosé, which is the first wine that I started making here in Texas, because I found the longer I lived here, the more dry rosés I was drinking. And then the Grower Project, which is a collaboration of myself and another winemaker. And we really use that production to focus kind of like in the food world, where chefs are really given the spotlight, and the farmers that really make that job possible are not necessarily, in that spotlight. And so it's kind of shining the light on them. And so in a similar way, the Grower Project is really about studying single site wines. So really learning the growers and families behind these vineyards, and also the vineyard names and what it tastes like year after year when it comes from that specific place. Because right now, these viticultural areas that like Lindsay was referring to, they're very large because we're in a large state. And so, in time, they'll become more specific. But for now, we're really looking at these overarching, very large regions. So I think that it's more, pardon my dog, it's more interesting to me to really learn this place when we can really look at single vineyards. If you'll,
he has a very big opinion on single vineyards. What it sounds like.
If I can open the door, you give me a moment. I
No
apologize.
problem.
Jen, maybe you can take a minute and tell us how many wineries are in Texas, because I see that screen, that flashing on my screen right now.
I did. So the research I found this morning was 436, and 54% of you guys got it right. So
Great.
There might have been a few added since whatever the research it was cited in September. So I assumed it was but yeah. So there's that well over 400 at this point, which is pretty. I think that's pretty incredible, considering I think that number has grown. I mean, it has to have grown exponentially over the last few years, has it not? I mean,
It has.
Yeah.
It's growing incredibly fast.
so I am impressed that our everybody viewing activity, that we got a 50% of them got it that right. So if you guys have questions, let us know. Please put any questions in the chat panel, and we'll try to make sure that everybody can answer them.
So Rae, if people are sipping along at home, should they start on the Albarino, or are you going to talk about the rosé first?
Yeah, I would suggest the Albarino. I don't have the Albarino in front of me, so I'll be.
For those of you who don't have it, I have a bottle so you can
There
see.
you go.
I love that
Like
label.
your artwork, being in marketing, I'm like, I like the label.
So yeah, that's the Grower Project Albarino. That wine comes from the Blackwater Draw Vineyard, which is near the town of Brownfield in the High Plains. The Texas High Plains, which is on the Llano Estacado, it ranges in altitude between 3,000 and 4,000 feet. So Brownfield sits at about 32 to 3,300 feet elevation. And this is the Hogue family. And the Hogue family actually, they were there as homesteaders from the early 1900s. They've been farming in the area ever since. And just several years ago, they started with some vineyard plantings. And so Albarino is one of the varieties that they've worked with. And I think that Albarino has a lot of potential in several different areas of Texas, especially in those higher elevation and sandier soils. They get some really great expression, really clean, really fresh. I think, what directs a lot of the wines that I make are the climate that we live in, not just for the things that are growing, but also the styles. And I think the Albarino is something that's, very, it's really, it's nice to enjoy in a warm weather, but it also has a lot of really great food pairings and things, a lot of things that we can enjoy here. One of my favorite things would be to put some Gulf seafood with it. But yeah, it's really fresh, and that variety is just a really fun one to see popping up here in some vineyards.
Yeah, Jennifer, if I can interject you just what Rae touched on, something Shelly and I have talked about when we've done some interviews together in podcast is, Albarino is a great Spanish variety grown in the Rías Baixas region of Spain. So it's a cool climate. And I think kind of where, Texas, when we're drinking Texas wines, we like to compare it to our favorite, wine from another particular region, whether we're drinking Cabernet Sauvignon, Albarino, something along those lines. So I always encourage people when I do seminars and tastings and stuff like that is to appreciate the wine for what it is. It's a great quality Albarino from the high plains of Texas, made by a Texas winemaker, as opposed to, wow, I really like this, but it doesn't remind me of X. I think, as we get further into Texas and Texas evolves and Texas wines go outside of Texas, I think that's what's going to be the most important thing, is to appreciate these wines for what they are, great quality Texas wines, as to trying to compare them to our favorite, wine from Argentina or Spain or France. Rae said earlier, she's like, we like to, single Texas for a couple varieties as well. And as she pointed out, Texas as a landmass is larger than the country of France. So France does not limit itself to just a few specific varieties. They grow what works well in particular regions all over the country of France, and that's what Texas is doing. If you find the right pockets of soil and climate in the high plains or hill country or Escondido Valley or Texoma or one of the AVAs of Texas, that's what it should be reflective of, that great quality wine, not just saying, well, this is a great wine, but it doesn't remind me of what I normally drink. And I always like to say, well, cool, it shouldn't. It's not from California. It's not from this particular area. It is from Texas, and that's what we need to be focusing on as we're enjoying Texas wine, is these amazing wines and winemakers and grapes grown in Texas.
Yeah.
Also, because when it's a normal year, we might be sitting in the wine garden here at the fair. If you had to pair that with a fair food, what do you think you'd pair it with?
I would need some prompting on fair foods.
Fried goodness, all things fried.
Anything fried.
Funnel cake.
High acid Albarino with fried goodness.
I went to funnel cake.
I love the funnel cake with this. I actually wanted to try it.
That idea.
But I even think the corn dog would work, because the corn dog has a slightly
little bit of
sweet
sweetness
batter.
in it.
Yeah.
You have that acid from the Albarino that's going to cut through it. And that's why Albarino and potato chips work so well together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I agree. I was just thinking a hot dog. A hot dog would be great, but corn dog even better. Oh my goodness, that would be. I think that any those fresh, really bright, crisp styles, they're very food friendly. So the nice thing about it is, it's kind of hard to go wrong. But I think that for sure, like, if you could get that with a corn dog, you'd be pretty happy.
All right, we'll list that as the new pairing on the website. The people can.
I love it.
You can come drive through. We did have a question about where the wines could be asked in the chat. We've provided those links in there so you can buy that directly. There's more information about all the wines on the fair's website under the Fair at Home, as well as the link over to Roots and Water where you can actually purchase it.
What's it like to work with another winemaker to collaborate on winemaking with the Grower Project? I know you work with Andrew Sides from Lost Straw Cellars.
Yeah, what's great is, just like any of this, it's, all of it, from the production of it, from working with the growers in different regions to then obviously like I mentioned earlier, then to the enjoyment of it. It's things that connect us. And so I find that, working with Andrew was just a natural fit. We first met each other and we just were immediate friends. And so his family, his experience coming from, he grew up in Brownfield. He comes from an agricultural background. I grew up in cities and working in restaurants, so a very different background, but we also just like, just like those two sides, it complements each other. And so when we come to the winemaking together, we really look at it, and he definitely helps me find really interesting sites and vineyards that he thinks are doing a great job. And then when we end up really looking at that and figuring out what varieties are going to work well. We do a lot of that together. We talk about certain varieties that we're seeing a lot of promise with, and then we find vineyards that we want to work with directly. So I think that that's just been a really great kind of just connection to also, get to explore and kind of experiment with different things, finding through either one of us. I always assume that he's probably going to find more interesting vineyards to work with than I will, but then there are definitely, places that I've found that kind of showed up on my map that then we end up working with too. So it's a really, I don't know, I think it's great to have very different backgrounds that complement the process, and I think hopefully show in the, in the end products.
Can I ask you a question, Rae? When we were putting this together, when I talked to you, you were in your truck driving through the high plains.
Yeah.
Do you travel to all of the sites and you're in those sites and touching the grapes and talking to people and looking at them? I found that very interesting when I was talking. I talked to you in your truck, and I talked to Doug Lewis on a tractor, which I thought was just a really unique experience.
Yeah, for sure. Doug on his tractor and me driving around. I mean, at any given time, that's one of us or another. So what is interesting about working in a place as large as Texas as well at this point in time is that making wine in Texas means you spend a lot of time during the harvest season, or really other seasons, through the growing season, but especially at harvest season, just running to vineyards all over the state. So lots of miles on that truck and lots of time in the car. But I think that, yeah, absolutely. It's a very close relationship throughout the year with our growing partners, any growers that I work with. We keep in touch. I'm at the vineyard throughout the growing season. We're talking about what's working, what doesn't, how things need to be farmed at different points in time in the season. And then at harvest, yes, I'm at absolutely every pick. And which, sometimes Mother Nature is kind and it works out logistically to be up there in the same place. And then sometimes you come back and you have to turn right around and go back. So, it's kind of the season doesn't really, agriculture doesn't listen to plans that we make. It's just, it makes its own plans. So it's a busy season, but it's also really exciting and invigorating. We're really seeing, this year was an especially exciting one because it's just the fruit quality coming in was just incredible. And so it's, it definitely keeps your energy up.
All right. Talk about the rosé a little bit.
Yeah. So the rosé is, it is, the reference point for this is always, there we go. It's Dandy Rosé. It's the first wine that I started making here in Texas. I started, the first vintage was in 2014. So this 2019 is the sixth vintage of it. It is a wine that the longer I lived in Texas in this warm climate, which I love the warm climate here in Texas, but I also find that I was drinking more dry rosés and styles like that. And so I found that a lot of wineries at the time were making a lot of good rosé, but to me, I was really looking for more of the dry styles, like the traditional styles. And so I thought, if I'm gonna I was consulting at the time, telling people to make more of those dry rosés, that I kind of had to follow my own advice. And so I started making some of my own. I think also, at some point you have to start making your own supply if you're drinking enough of it. But it's with all traditional Southern French varieties, but like everything that I make, it's always 100% grown here in Texas. So this is Mourvèdre, Cinsault, and Grenache and Cunoise. So all traditional Southern French varieties. You'll see them in Southern Rhone and then in Provence, and really with a bright, clear, crisp, clean style. And this to me is the perfect example of a wine that will go with about anything. I mean, you could put this with fresh oysters. You could put it with, you know, a burger off the grill. It complements about anything. I think I've had it with a pretty wide range of foods and have yet to find something that it disagrees with. But so as far as fair foods, I'd say you can kind of have fun.
I'm kind of thinking the fried peanut butter and jelly.
All right.
I
Yeah.
was thinking fried Oreo.
Fried Oreo.
All right. Fried peanut butter and jelly. I like it.
It is one of the all-time favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think.
Very
Nice.
nice.
So yeah, that's
Did you say where the grapes were grown? I can't remember. Sorry.
I don't keeping all these vintages clear in my mind. I don't have the list in front of me. It should be Counoise from Farmhouse Vineyards and Brownfield. The Sanso came from the Phillips Vineyard, which is also Brownfield. Let's see.
So all High Plains grapes.
Yeah, it is all High Plains fruit. Although it's mostly been High Plains fruit, but not every year. So I just put Texas on the label, which allows me to each year find the best fruit that I can and use it in there. And the reason that, you know, to me, like the Grower Project focuses specifically on single vineyards and really trying to, you know, show what those specific sites are about and what they taste like and what those varieties taste like there. And Dandy is really about showing a very consistent style that we can make here in many different areas, and something that I think agrees with the climate that we live in, and a style that we can make very consistently that can compete on the world stage of, you know, just being known as that's a style that we can do here in Texas. So I think that's more the focus for me with Dandy Rosé, because it's not, although again, it's always 100% Texas fruit, but more than the single sites that it comes from, it's much more about that style being just a really refreshing style that you can enjoy year in and year out.
Beautiful.
Rae, I think you're maybe one of the smaller producers that we have in the box, but I know that you've been really hustling and have some pretty good distribution around the state. And I've seen your wines at a few higher end grocery retailers and wine shops. So it's good to see some smaller brands being represented out there. So I know that you've been hustling on these wines, the Grower Project and Dandy Rosé, and then you also have a sparkling wine. So congratulations on your successes out there. And these are great wines, and I hope everybody's enjoying drinking them.
Thank you very much.
So I think maybe if we have any more questions, we can go down that road, but we move over here to Shawn. If you can see him, he is in the top part of the cellar, and I came outside, so you have the vineyard back here behind me. Shawn, could you maybe tell us a little bit about Pedernales and the history, and then the wine? I'll tell you why we picked the wine. And it, like I said earlier, it goes really well with spicy barbecue. So we got
very much so. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on as well. It's pretty cool to be part of this panel with all these awesome people. So Pedernales is one of the older winemakers that have been around. It kind of started by the Kuhlken family back in the early 1990s. They had a vineyard about north of Fredericksburg, a little bit, right in the Bell Mountain AVA, and they were growers, and the whole family kind of pitched in. And then the next generation turned that into a winery out near Stonewall. That was really led by the brother and sister pair, the Kuhlken, David and Julie Kuhlken. David is the president and the executive winemaker, and Julie, who has her PhD in philosophy, kind of runs everything else, the marketing and everything else. And they're an awesome pair, and they've done a lot of really great things with this winery. But really, a lot of the history of where they kind of get their kind of spirit from. If you ever get a chance to look at a Pedernales bottle, it has this weird kind of little emblem on the top. Pedernales or Pedernales, you know, we're in Texas, we can pronounce things however we want here. It's flint in the native Indian language. that there was a lot of flint along the shores of the Pedernales River, and in the Kuhlken vineyards they found a whole bunch of arrowheads, and they also found some at the new winery here as well. So it kind of connects the family's vineyard with the winery, this kind of idea of flint and this idea of the old arrowheads, and even inside of the lettering there's actually an arrowhead, which is the A. So that's kind of a lot of the fun kind of artistic background to it. But really the winery was kind of founded on sustainability. So they do have a lot of sustainability practices in the winery with good cover crops and water management and things like that. But they also focus a lot on sustainability in the winery as well. We have a really great staff here, and they take care of the staff. They make sure the staff is paid well, and everyone loves working here. And it's the word sustainability is really a whole business model, not just about the land. But it's been very exciting to be part of the team here.
Could you tell us a little bit about the GSM and the structure of it, where it's grown? Go ahead.
So if we go back to that Kuhlken vineyard, we kind of were some of the earlier adopters of Tempranillo. So you see a lot of Tempranillo in our grapes, and in Texas you'll see a lot of Tempranillo as well. I'm sure we'll all be talking about some of the kind of the grapes which have been some of the poster children for Tempranillo for Texas. But GSM is kind of one of our fun projects. We started it, I would say our first vintage was probably in 2008 or 2009, and we wanted to create a GSM, which the GSM is it's a traditional Rhone style variety coming from the southeast of France. It stands for Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and it's a varietal, or it's a blend that's really focused on pulling some of the kind of peppery earth spice with really ripe fruit on top, and that's kind of the traditional style that we wanted to create. So in our first few vintages, we were really creating a very classic Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre blend. And then as we kind of, really started exploring it year after year, we kind of realized, hey, we're not going to be able to recreate what they're doing in France. And as you see with a lot of people in Texas, we really start to understand what Texas does best. And so we kind of slowly started to kind of shift what we were putting in the blend to kind of reflect that. So over time, certain grapes like Syrah started to kind of become less in the blend, not because Syrah's not good in Texas. Syrah's amazing in Texas, but the vintage variation in Syrah is all over the place. So some years Syrah is absolutely amazing, and some years it's like, oh man, I wish it was like last year. So we ended up kind of playing with what ended up working better in Texas. And so every year it's kind of what that year gave us. So this year, for the 2017 vintage, we really liked the Mourvèdre. So we put 43% Mourvèdre in this one, and then followed that up with some Cinsault and some Carignan. And Grenache ended up taking about 25% of it as well. And then we got little bits of Syrah and Petite Syrah in there as well. So it's got a whole bunch of grapes in there. We really ping a lot of our growers and vineyards. So we have everything from Bingham to Farmhouse to Leahy in here to the Kuhlken vineyard. What's fun about being able to mix the high plains with the hill country is you're getting a lot of really neat elements that you're able to pair together when you're doing a blended wine like this. Versus doing like a single varietal wine or a single vineyard wine. With this, you're really able to take notes from one vineyard and have it complement notes from another vineyard. So say, for instance, if we're up in the high plains, if we're up in, 3,400 feet above sea level, which is pretty high altitude, we're pairing that with some stuff from the Kuhlken vineyard, which is down in the kind of 1,600 feet. And the difference that elevation is gonna give you to the grapes is very noticeable in the glass. So when we're blending all that together, it comes out really fun and interesting. But yeah, I would say the GSM is definitely made to go with that kind of spicy Texas barbecue. I mean, if you were to really ask me, I think if you were to get a really like spicy garlic sausage, that's like, smoke it over some oak, I think it would really sing to you there.
Well, apparently this was somebody's wedding wine.
Oh.
Kelly said that she used your 2016 It featured
Yes.
their wedding in 2018.
Yes.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So we're also known a lot for our Tempranillo and our Viognier as well. Here in Pedernales right now, to kind of give an idea of like where our kind of future is going, David Kuhlken has stepped into a executive winemaker position, which is super exciting. We're very excited about that. In fact, he gets to spend a little bit more time out in the vineyards, working with a lot of our family partners and people who we've been working with for a long time. And Joanna Wilcock has kind of stepped in as our head winemaker, and she's been doing some really great stuff over the past 2 vintages. I'm really excited for next year's Viognier is going to be super duper pretty. Our Viognier is always very interesting and pretty. I think it's a really good kind of textbook example of Texas Viognier. But as actually Jason was saying, whenever we're kind of comparing wines like a GSM or Viognier or Tempranillo to their old world or the California examples, I really do feel like Texas is getting to the point in the last few years where we really started to stop comparing them and really accept them for the quality that they are here. And that's allowing them to kind of stretch their wings. And the quality is really becoming what Texas is, not, oh, well, this tastes like Rioja, so therefore it's good. It's no, this Tempranillo is Texas and it tastes like Texas. It doesn't taste like Rioja. And I think as consumers are finding that, and they're finding that, I think Viognier is probably the best example of that in Texas. There's no Viogniers in the world that taste like Texas Viognier. It's got extremely unique characteristics to it. And it's been recognized throughout the world as one of the best, if not the best place in the world to grow Viognier.
Shawn, if I can jump in, I had an opportunity to do a Texas wine dinner in Manhattan last October, and Julie Kuhlken joined the dinner at the oldest private club in Manhattan. And it was a great dinner, about 5 different producers. I spoke on behalf of 4. Julie obviously spoke on behalf of Pedernales. And it was great to see the reaction from people living in Manhattan. You know, they were very hardcore New Yorkers, and it was a very Texas themed dinner with pairings from all over the state of Texas. And the biggest question that we were asked were, these wines are amazing, how do we get them in New York? And it was great to see that reaction from all these people. And I know Pedernales actually has some distribution in New York. So it was great to see just a lot of people who have never tried Texas wine before, who, you know, are focusing on old world wines for the most part on the East Coast. You know, some Napa Valley wines from the West Coast, and obviously they have the Finger Lakes appellation up in New York. But just the reaction to having Texas wine, and it was an 80-person dinner in New York, and it was great to see just the reaction of what people in New York and outside of Texas thought of Texas wines, and it was great to see. It was a great dinner to be had.
Jason, you made a comment last year at Texom that I absolutely adore, and that's why aren't people getting Texas wine outside of Texas? And that's because we consume most of it here.
That is true.
I love that comment, and I love repeating it to people because it made such a huge impression on me last year when we actually wanted to have Texom.
Yeah, so. and coming from the distribution side, you know, and obviously I represent a certain portfolio, so I have about 15 different Texas wines in my portfolio at RNDC, which is the Republic National Distributing Company. But that's a big question that I would get from sommeliers throughout. And again, for those that don't know what Texom is, it's a Texas Sommelier Conference. So we have sommeliers from all the world joining us, and it was great to have them say, how do we get these wines, you know, in other parts of the country? And, you know, like I do make that statement a lot, is Texans consume about 95% of what we produce. So we consume a lot of our own wines. And I think as we, you know, increase production, we will see Texas wines outside of Texas. You know, I mentioned Pedernales in New York. I know Kim McPherson has McPherson wines in Washington, D.C. I helped get some wines up to Nebraska for a friend who is a sommelier in Nebraska. And again, for the RNDC side, you know, we have partners in other states, and it's easier for me to make those connections in other markets. But yeah, it's great to see the interest of Texas wine outside of the state of Texas.
I have this loud parachute guy over me right here, but as we have put this case together, seeing the amount of people out of Texas that are buying the case and getting it out there has actually been really cool be able to talk about the wines and talk about different wines that we have here and how we are able to get them out, at least into the 48 contiguous states, has been a really great experience over the last 3 weeks. And we'll have this available as long as people want it. So it's been a great process.
And kind of touching on that as well, it's great to see the interest on the outside. And obviously, I think probably a lot of the people that are purchasing the case are within the great state of Texas. And, as the official Texas wine ambassador that Lindsay helped come to fruition, it was an idea that I had driving around the great state of Texas, making sure there's Texas wines on wine lists across the state of Texas. But again, I think it's important for those who are tuning in and enjoying these Texas wines, that when you're out in restaurants and, you're out in your favorite, wherever you enjoy wine, if they don't have Texas wine on their list, I always say, ask the question, why not?
Yeah.
I'm presenting to sommeliers and restaurateurs as someone in distribution. And, my background is I'm an advanced sommelier. I spent most of my career at Pappas Brothers Steakhouse in Dallas as one of their sommeliers. So, I've been very blessed to taste a lot of great wines in my career. So the fact that I get to, be an advocate and a spokesperson for Texas wine is great. So for those tuning in and enjoying Texas wine when you're out at restaurants, I always say, ask the question, why not? Why not one Texas wine? We don't, it would be great to have a Texas section on the wine list, but at least one white and one red is always great to see on a wine list.
As someone who as someone who ran a wine program at a restaurant in Dallas, Ocean Prime, I got that question and I was a little hesitant 10 years ago to go down that road. And then when I went down it, I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? Because there are so many great wines. And I actually had this conversation with Garrett Welch, who's actually in Atlanta now. I was like, Garrett, why didn't you bring these wines to me sooner? And so as this has evolved, ask that question. And when you're out in a restaurant, why don't you have any if they don't have Texas wines, ask them why. And if they need help finding a Texas wine, show them where to go. Because as a somm running a wine program, I did that exact same thing as what you're talking about, Jason. I did not have any wines and I evolved them, and this is what came out of it. So thank you. Go ahead, Lindsay. I'm sorry.
Maybe folks have figured out where Heather is, but Heather, tell people where you are, and then maybe we can go back to Rae and we can talk about where people can go to taste her wines after that.
So you mean where I am right now?
You are right now physically, yes.
I'm physically in Hill Country at Pedernales. Shawn's actually over here. We had a little bit of feedback, so we separated ourselves. So what you see behind me is vineyard and land in Pedernales, and it's beautiful. Like I don't know if you all can see how the sun is setting behind me and what it looks like. It's absolutely stunning. And I lived down here in Austin for 5 years when I went to school, and I love coming back down here and spending time down here. I'm actually going to go have a beer at Albert right over here. Just because I like to go to that one little place in Albert. So that's where I am physically right now.
And Rae, where can people taste your wine?
You can, prior to this pandemic that we're currently experiencing, there are many restaurants across the state. We do also distribute, we distribute throughout Texas. We're in Oklahoma and then in New York, specifically in New York City market, although some upstate in like Hudson Valley. Although most of what we do does stay here in Texas, and so you can, get it directly from us, but you can definitely find us in restaurants and independent retailers. I know that we have both Dandy as well as the Grower Project in both all those central markets in the state, as well as then most Whole Foods carry Dandy, and then it's just kind of it's something that, again, if you're looking for it, you can always ask your local Whole Foods if they don't have it, that they can get it. So
one specific question I got, if where was anywhere near Georgetown that you could get your wines?
Offhand, I guess I should know that offhand.
But a Whole Foods or a Central Market, it would be a good place to start.
That would be a great place to start. And if they want to send me an email, I don't know if you all link to, but if there's a way I can get that answer to them. I just don't know if I can tell you right offhand.
If you don't have shipping available to you, we are selling them individually, and we will ship to all of the 48 states. We cannot ship, 47 states. We can't ship to Utah. So if you can't find it in your Central Market or Whole Foods and you want it, you can certainly go on there. You can email me or Rae or whoever. And all of these wines are individually priced as well as in the case. So if you can't find it and you're just, trying to find it, send me an email. I'll be more than happy to get it out to you.
One of the things that I really liked when you guys came back together with all the recommendations is that all the wines were really approachable from a price point as well.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't, so can you give a little range of like what the retail price of some of these wines are if you were, find them on the shelf somewhere?
Do you want me to do that?
Sure.
So retail, what I looked at when I was pricing them out was what they had them at the winery and then what they might be able to look at them. Most everything is between $18 and $40, depending on what you're looking for. So that was what our goal was in trying to get the wines and keep them within a range that people find it approachable. People wanted to reach out, they wanted to try it. They didn't want to spend $100 on a bottle to try it. We have all of these different wines, and then you can evolve into other wines from there if you wanted to go into a higher price point. So most of everything in the 12 pack is $18 to $40, depending on what they are. I believe Rae's, yours is around 22. Is that right? 18
Yeah,
to 20.
both of them are in the low 20s.
Yeah. And then the GSM is also in that same price range. I think it's right at 24. So.
Yes, it is.
So Jason is the barbecue and wine, Texas barbecue and Texas wine pairing guru. And so I know we talked a little bit about a great barbecue pairing for this wine, but I'm curious to know, Jason, what do you think GSM pairs the best with in terms of barbecue?
I think you need a little more marbling, a little more fat. So I'm kind of more of a, fatty brisket on, I think, that side. I think a beef rib would be a nice match as well. So kind of that salt and pepper and post oak smoke on the beef rib would be very enjoyable. But again, it's kind of that finding that right amount of tannin with what you want to pair it. Again, it's not a math problem. Wine goes with just about anything. As Rae said, she can take her rosé with a burger and oysters and everything. So it's about what you like, but it's also, about finding what the guest likes and again, finding that perfect pairing. But I think these wines are stellar with barbecue and even up to, go into a fine steakhouse, bring a dry. I think, again, the sky's the limit with wine in general. So again, during this time of, staying in more and, when we have the opportunity to go out, eat local, drink local, I think that's the important message, Texas beer, Texas spirits. Again, I preach that. Why not Texas wine? Because Texans are prideful of things from Texas. So not ask for Texas wine when you're out and about. That's the most important thing I can say is, ask that question and, and support what's in your state, and nothing wrong with drinking Napa and French and Spanish wine, but when having the opportunity, I'd like to drink Texas.
I think it's so fun too to consider that there's so much innovation going on in Texas. We're not just trying to catch up with kind of the way things have always been done, but Texans are innovating in the wine industry. I just did a presentation for some folks about just really innovative things from different grape varieties that are being grown to winemaking techniques to folks are making wine in amphora. They're making different styles, piquette, which is kind of made from the winemaking leftovers and making a low alcohol type of a canned wine product. There's just so much going on that's really exciting and innovative. And it's not kind of the tried and true. It's unusual varieties and new blends, and it's exciting. So I'm excited to see what's next in the next 10 to 20 years in Texas, because it's sure to be something different. I know I'm doing some carbonic maceration on Petit Syrah, right? So, and Pedernales just did a new pet nat, right?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Now, we've been actually playing with it the past few years. This is the first year we decided to actually release it. We've been drinking it all ourselves. So I guess it was time to make enough for everyone else too.
Thank you.
But to touch on what Jason was saying, I come from a distribution and a buyer background as well, and I want the consumers to understand that oftentimes I might like something as a buyer, but I can't bring it in because I don't feel like my clientele is either ready for it or they're gonna buy it. But if you as a customer go into these places and say, hey, I would like to see more Texas wines, a lot of buyers get excited about that. And from that, they feel like they have like, you know, the ability to go out and they have the ability to find these great Texas wines and bring them in and actually be proud of them because their customers are supporting them. And so then the people who are funding those buyers say, okay, I actually see people are buying these Texas wines. So please go. I don't care if it's a grocery store. I don't care if it's a convenience store around the corner. Tell them, hey, I would love to have more Texas wines because that's what it's going to take to get it spread out even further into the marketplace.
Well, and Shawn, to touch on that a little bit, what I was going to mention earlier when Jason was talking about the restaurants is TDA is going to try and revamp the program that we had a while ago that was more focused on Go Texan, our marketing campaign, but we're going to revamp it to the Uncorked Texas Wines campaign that we launched 3 years ago and still going. You can see more about it. I don't want to waste y'all's time on uncorkedtexaswines.com, but we're going to have like some tearaways and leave-aways that folks can leave at restaurants or, like you mentioned, at a grocery store or a convenience store to put in the billfold to say either, you know, one side, thank you for serving Texas wines, or hey, why don't you have a Texas wine on the list? I would buy it by the glass or by the bottle. So we're working on that and hopefully have that out at events and for distribution to consumers to start using to help push that retailer and restaurant side of things.
And the TDA is a great partner because they, so the Texas Wine Champion is something for restaurants to be awarded. As the Texas Wine Ambassador, if they were pouring Texas wines by the glass and Texas wines on their wine list, they were awarded a certificate from the TDA with Commissioner Miller's signature on it. Before, obviously, my travel was halted, I was presenting them in person to the restaurants. So hopefully we'll see a little more of that as my travel opens up again. But again, it was a great program for restaurants to come in, and I would say, hey, you can be awarded this, and it's another, you know, bragging right to have more Texas wine on your wine list, to be named a Texas Wine Champion on behalf of the Texas Department of Agriculture.
Yeah. And we should say that tomorrow kicks off Texas Wine Month.
That's right. October's Texas Wine Month.
Cheers to that.
You have no excuse not to open a bottle and try something.
Right. Or several.
Right.
Well, we haven't got any other questions from anybody attending. Is there anything else, Shelly or Jason, that you want to ask anybody, or Heather?
I would just love to tell everybody that we're going to do this through the month of October. We're doing them on Wednesdays. They are recorded so that if you can't join and I can't be there, feel free to go back and look at the recordings. All of us that you see here are very accessible. If you have questions or you want to talk about Texas wine or wine in general, all of us are available to anybody who is looking to be a part of this. And I think that as you delve into the world of Texas wine, you will find that it is fascinating, it's enjoyable, it's fun, and it's a great experience to go out and see all of these different wineries and how it's growing and how it's evolving. And I think all of us on here have seen that evolution over the last 20 years and where we are now. So I'm super excited to be a part of this, and I hope that people will look at it and read it and join it and go out and drink some wine, Texas wine.
Do the hard work.
Right. It's hard work drinking wine. I'm telling you. I think it's more hard work making wine.
Well, the good thing is that there's the drinking of the wine in the end. So
Right.
That's right. And thank you to all of you so much for being so helpful and making this all come the way that it has.
Yeah. So
such a pleasure.
on behalf of the State Fair of Texas, I want to thank you guys for making a great Texas product and some great Texas wine. We are so happy that we can celebrate these virtually. Hopefully we will be doing that in person next year in the middle of the fair, and actually pairing some of this wine with some of the fried foods we talked about. So, or some of the amazing fair foods that you may not have heard of. So there is some things that aren't fried, surprisingly. Not many, but a few. So thanks everyone for joining us. Everybody who was on the panel. Again, we are recording this. We will post this and we will share this through the State Fair website. You guys want to find out more things, more Fair from Home things, we have the Big Tex Cooking School. There's lots of ways you can download and create the fair at home. And of course, we're having the drive-through through the end of October as well. So cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next Wednesday.
All right.
Bye.